Welcome back to the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. Today we have a really interesting guy. He's practiced north of 40 years. He's a criminal lawyer named Gary Ostrow. And the thing about Gary that I both appreciate and rattles me a little bit is a large part of Gary's practice is representing alleged sex offenders, people charged with sex crimes. Gary, say hello to our audience and explain to him, why do you handle those cases? Not everybody does.
I appreciate being on. It's an honor. You and I go back 30 years, but let's not get sidetracked. First of all, I don't just do criminal law. Let's specify that I practice a lot more, but let's talk about direct and address your question about sex crimes. Just like any other offense, there are degrees of offense. There are often other motives or opportunists that may create a claim that before might not have existed. And the most overheard, abused answer to that question when asked is that everybody is entitled to and has a right to an effective, assertive defense, no matter what they're charged with. So that's what I get paid for, is to do as much damage control, whatever the circumstances, whatever the degree is, whatever the number of counts are, and whatever the crime, I am there to do damage control.
So obviously you've represented people charged with all sorts of crimes, right? But I know that there are lawyers out there, for instance, Fred Haddad, Bruce Zimmett, they don't get involved in sex crime cases. So I know it's not for all criminal defense lawyers. Some lawyers just don't like it, and some other lawyers are okay with it. Obviously, you're okay handling those cases, right?
I think the first impact or impression that people may get when they hear that demonstrates how difficult, because of the nature of the offense. You have armed robberies, you have homicide, you have aggravated batteries with serious bodily injury, all traumatic, difficult issues to deal with. But particularly, and probably most particularly, of all the crimes out there that somebody can be charged with, I think the most difficult from a public perception point of view and difficulty because of that are sex offenses, without a doubt. And I find, because of that, I find it to be more challenging. And as I've learned since my first trial back in 1981, or whatever ancient date that was, that no matter what the facts, no matter what the evidence, no matter what the nature of the evidence, whether it be footage or statements or other recordings or multiple witnesses, that anything can be effectively, not only defended, but effectively defended, and doing the most damage control that is humanly possible.
But to be clear, effectively defended doesn't always mean getting them off the hook. It might mean getting them a lesser included or getting them as good of a sentence as you can get, because you can't change the facts, right?
Absolutely.
Now, you've been practicing for north of 40 years. I know that you're a big trial guy, like I used to be, on the civil side. Can you approximate for our listeners how many jury trials you've tried on the criminal side?
I'm going to cite to Judge Bob Diaz, because he and I had a running bet. Back in the day, we were both with the Public Defender's Office, and he was trying cases. We were both trying cases like maniacs, I guess, back then. And the only reason I surpassed him in numbers is because he took the bench as a county court judge. But I can say with certainty, over 600 jury trials since 1981, when I was interning with the public defender. Before I even took the bar, I was able to try jury trials, which is a priceless opportunity, by the way.
And I know for years and years you had this reputation as being absolutely the best lawyer to have if you get a DUI. So I always had that intention of calling you if it ever happened to me, but it never did. So fortunately, you never had to be my lawyer. However, I know that these days you're focused a lot more on drug possession cases. I want to talk to you about those. But I want to come back to the sex cases. The sex abuse cases or sexual crimes are really on the forefront these days in the news. We have the Jeffrey Epstein situation. We're constantly hearing about sex trafficking. So can you tell us, from your perspective as a criminal defense attorney, how that whole landscape has changed? The sex crimes, the crime. What are some of the common, most frequent sex crimes that you see? Let's talk about that first, that you see charged.
First of all, let me address the first part of your question. And because it's bigger now, because ever since Epstein broke the ice, so to speak, and exposed the underbelly of what's really going on out there, from human sex trafficking to child sex trafficking, in today, in the digital age, you have a lot more sophisticated methods. You have decoys operating with underage children that often entrap the victim being the target.
So you're talking about law enforcement people posing as underage minors, having conversations with people who agree to travel and meet them, and that's when they get arrested like they used to do on Dateline, right?
Correct. That's pretty much that part of it, the decoy scenario, I'll call it.
Have you defended cases with people charged?
Absolutely. And often you'll find when you read the logs of exchanges, which they always have, it's borderline, even on his face, as to whether or not it's entrapment, which is a whole analysis. I don't want to get off the path, but there's objective entrapment and subjective entrapment. Objective is outrageous police conduct. Subjective is whether the person was predisposed but for the invitation or but for the luring of the act.
But if they were the point is, if they were predisposed to doing it anyway, then they can't really be entrapped or talked into it by law enforcement, because my understanding of entrapment is they would not otherwise have done it but for being talked into it by whoever is posing as the child or whoever is entrapping them. Is that
exactly? But then you have the objective level of entrapment, which goes to police conduct, outrageous police conduct, which is unrelated to predisposition.
So have you used that as a defense in cases like that? You've represented people like that?
Absolutely. In any case, whether it's drug trafficking, which is a good example, or in those cases of state crime of attempting to conspiracy to commit travel for the purposes of sexual conduct or misconduct. Often the tactics employed are subject to being, we can blow holes in it because these officers often, not always, get carried away with the inducements, and somebody who might not be as predisposed ordinarily might get caught up in something that ordinarily they wouldn't.
So how about just allegations of sexual abuse? I know that itself can be abused by people who are looking to use it to take advantage. Do you ever find that or use that as a defense in your cases? Someone with an axe to grind or someone with an ulterior motive who's making these accusations? I'm not necessarily talking about children or adults, but tell us about that.
Well, just imagine when you, and I do some family law, and you don't have to be a family law practitioner to know that the civil arena for family litigation is brutal because of what's at stake, because you have the instincts, parental instincts of a mother or father going after the other adverse party, whether it's a wife or parent of that kid, and it gets brutal and graphic often. And many of these people, litigants, will resort to just about anything. And now with the new legislation, relatively speaking, in family law, for example, where there's bare allegations of child abuse in the home, immediately might get that former partner, displaced from the home, which would give say in this case, the husband sole possession of the marital home, if that's the case, or if it's a custody battle, which is often the case. It puts them in a sweet situation where the other litigant party is out on the street and, as importantly, unable to have contact with their own minor child.
Right.
So these things are thrown around, and now it's become, I believe, more sophisticated, where the mere allegations, and I can't quote the specific statute, but they certainly exploit these developments in the law to get the upper hand, because once you displace the other party from the home, you're 90% there in terms of them having to support themselves on the outside end. The custody issues are not completely resolved, but they certainly favor the party who continues to have access.
But aside from child custody, anytime an accusation is made, that can literally end somebody's career and oftentimes their freedom. So are there other people with axes to grind other than spouses fighting over minor children that you've encountered?
Let's use this example. In New York, with the recent legislation that allows people to go back retroactively and file, I don't think there's even a statute on some of these things. Like
sex abuse cases. No statute of limitations.
Correct.
Same in Florida now.
When they passed that in New York, you saw a flood of lawsuits being filed for obvious reasons to get in these cases and overwhelm the defense. And people are exploiting these, as they always will exploit opportunities like that when it comes to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yeah. Just human nature. Yes, and with the advent of more advanced cameras, surveillance tools, digital apparatus, computers, there's nothing people won't and can't and won't do to further their own pure interests, for one thing, and to exploit that at the same time, whether it's in a divorce, a child custody battle, a civil challenge to recover a lump sum of money.
Right. And all of the cameras that are out there now, surveillance cameras, isn't that, a lot of times, isn't that used for future negotiations, so to speak?
Absolutely.
For
You can't make a
extortion?
move out there these days because anything is surveilled and often recorded as well.
That can be a good thing. I'm sure it helps solve a lot of crimes.
It's a sword and it's a shield.
Of course, this came to mind when, in the aftermath of the Jeffrey Epstein case and the revelation of all of the dignitaries, celebrities, and other people whom he hung out with. And the big question that lingers is he probably has video or had video of all of these people doing these things that he kept in his pocket just in case. What are your thoughts about that? What do you know about that?
It's pretty commonsensical. That would be an enormously effective way to control somebody for the rest of their life. Secondly, don't you find it interesting, Russell, that none of these videotapes, never mind the identity of the people, A-listers, politicians, athletes, Hollywood celebrities, whatever, have never been disclosed? The manifest of the travel of the plane to the island has been disclosed.
So you mentioned that the Epstein case opened everyone's eyes publicly and created an awareness about what sex trafficking is.
Tip of the iceberg.
So in his case, minors, I know it involves other people, but we just hear more and more about this lately with the P. Diddy search warrant situation. They said it's connected to a human trafficking investigation. What do you know generally broadly about the music industry and what goes on there with respect to this? Talk about that.
At the risk of being further labeled as a conspiracy theorist, I'm fascinated by it, by the satanic, dark, evil agenda behind the music industry.
Have you represented any celebrities in the music business or otherwise in any interesting cases?
I've been involved with the case involving Chris Brown.
What was he charged with?
Trafficking in endangered species.
Which endangered species? This is not what I expected to hear, but go ahead.
The Capuchin monkey is an endangered species, and Chris Brown was daughter, whose name is royalty, of course, who was 8 years old at the time. What was trending is celebrities having literally captive audience, no pun intended, at the expense of a wildlife, whether endangered or not. He had purchased a Capuchin monkey, which is an endangered species, allegedly from my client, who was an alleged wildlife trafficker or dealer. And he was a witness. He got a diversion program and had to forfeit the animal, but that would be one case that was very interesting where Chris Brown was involved. Another one, maybe a little played out, I represented Ricky Williams for his dirty urine controversy with the NFL, which was huge.
Yes, so he was a Miami Dolphins player.
He led the league
And-
in back-to-back seasons without an offensive line,
Right, but
I might add.
Do you
Yeah.
believe that marijuana should be legal recreationally? What's just your
I think
personal observation on
I
that?
think adults need to be, even though they don't deserve it, often need to be treated like adults. And yes, it should be absolutely legal because they're just enriching the black market by making it illegal. That's all they're doing. And the drug war, that's an absurd concept. It's never going to change.
So let's change gears now. I want to talk to you about drug cases. You handle a lot of drug cases?
I've done a large share of drug trafficking, a lot of trafficking cases, state and federal.
Yeah, you're old enough to remember back in the 80s, you were practicing back in the 80s when there were a lot of these trafficking cases, continuing criminal enterprise cases brought against people.
Money laundering statute came relatively.
Money laundering, right.
Correct.
And then came fee forfeiture, where they were going after lawyers and questioning the fees that they got, because if the fees were dirty money, the lawyers would have to forfeit the fees.
Correct.
Where is criminal law today, and how has it changed as we sit here today in 2024? What's going on broadly when it comes to the criminal justice system and drug charges from your perspective as a criminal defense lawyer?
Well, back then, it seemed like everybody and anybody had the potential to be a drug trafficker. And I'm not being facetious, because with the minimum mandatories and the outrageous abuses that I saw from, I'm not going to hold.
You don't have to put a name on it, but
Well,
you're talking
I
about
want to,
prosecutors?
but I'm talking about the policies of say, for example, Broward County State Attorney's trafficking. It was okay to set up your best friend who might have sold you 10 pills out of her prescription or sold you the whole script, and therefore be looking at a 25-year mandatory for 60 pills. That was okay. And the informant, who was the person that needed to get a reduced sentence by offering her best friend this prescription, wasn't supervised, even though the law required it, was using, buying, selling narcotics, and they didn't supervise them. And I had so many cases, I can't even begin to tell you, where that was apparent to the state and the traffic prosecutors and John Gallagher, who I always liked, but that's how he operated. And the abuse was more than I could bear. It was just something that it was hard to deal with because the hypocrisy and the insanity of it all.
But what's going on with drug charges these days? How has it changed from back in the 80s?
First of all, it was the Wild West back then. It was just on the street. They were setting people up with reverse stings, selling crack that they were manufacturing via Nick Navarro within 1,000 feet of a school that nobody knew was within 1,000 feet of the purchase. And there's by subjecting somebody to 3 years in prison for one crack rock.
So for those who are not aware, Nick Navarro was a controversial sheriff back in the day of Broward County, and I know he made headlines because he literally set up kitchens and he was manufacturing crack cocaine for use in reverse drug stings.
And he was the consultant for the movie Scarface because he was the guy who gave them the inside. A lot of the material that you see in the movie Scarface that we all saw 300 times was Nick Navarro acting as consultant to the set. Yeah, remember they raided Nick's safe and they found a kilo or two of blow in his safe and a gun with a silencer. But he was Nick Navarro, and I liked the guy. He did great.
Oh, he never got charged for that?
Oh, no.
I didn't know about that.
Never got charged.
You know what I do remember, though? He bought a really expensive German helicopter for the sheriff's department. It was all over the news. And fast forward about a year or two, I was in the Broward County Courthouse, and I was wearing my helicopter tie with helicopters all over it. Nick Navarro walks in the elevator, and he says, "I love your tie." And on the spot, impulsively, I took the tie off, and I gave it to him.
I like that
thank you
move.
very much. It's all good. The other memory I have, I just want to share with our listeners, is that when I was in private practice, we represented a lot of law enforcement people. And in personal injury cases, they'd get hurt on the job. But it was always great to represent law enforcement people. Why? Because they were nice, at least nice to their lawyers. They were very cooperative. They were smart people. They were very grateful for what we did. And it was a pleasure representing them. So we represented a Broward Sheriff's Office deputy who was conducting a reverse sting. And a pickup truck pulls up, and the officer who was undercover, the deputy, sells some crack to the driver of the pickup truck. And when he says, "Sheriff's office, you're under arrest," the guy in the pickup truck takes off. But as he's leaving, the rear bumper of the pickup truck clips my client's knee, causing a surgical knee problem. He goes to the ground. The guy takes off. They apprehend him. And so he's arrested and charged, and he's sent to prison.
Battery, probably, deadly weapon.
I was something like that, but I was a young lawyer, and my partner, Carl Carmen, asked me to go up to Lake City, Florida, to go to the prison to take this guy's deposition, because the owner of the pickup truck that he was driving, who we sued, claimed I left my keys up by the front door of my townhouse. I met this guy. I fell asleep. I woke up. The guy was gone. So was the truck. It was stolen. And they were denying coverage because there was no permissive use of the vehicle, as we say. Of course, when I go up to Lake City to the prison and I take this guy's deposition, I heard a little bit of a different story. And the story was that he had met this guy who happened to own the truck, and they went back to the guy's apartment. And they were partying. And the guy gave him a couple $100 and said, "Go pick up some rocks." So he gives him the car keys, and he goes and buys the crack and the rest of the story. And, of course, that case settled. But that was my limited interaction with the criminal justice system as a civil lawyer, and that was fine with me because I much preferred doing civil cases to criminal. But these days, I know the big concern is fentanyl and these drugs that are so powerful, these synthetic opiates that are so powerful that they kill people. Do you represent a lot of people in connection with drug charges for those sorts of things?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a client that was charged with trafficking in, I think it's oxycodone is the medical legal term of Percocet.
Right.
And he had hundreds of pills that by all appearances, it's the oblong-shaped white Percocet stamped. By all appearances, 10 milligram perks that went on the street for anywhere from $15 to $25, which is a big hit because the cost from a pharmacy, I don't know, maybe $1 or $2. So that was very popular. One of the things that I undertook in the defense of my client charged with trafficking was to test those pills because they charged it as oxycodone, I believe is the term. There was no oxycodone in those pills. It was all fentanyl. So that creates some legal issues because of the way it's charged, first of all. Second of all, it's not what the state is alleging it was, and it certainly rocked the boat and created problems for the state's case because it's not what they purported it to be or what they.
If that's a new client calling you, you can take their call.
I'm going to bill it accordingly, Russell.
No, but you got to
I'm
talk
losing
to them.
out on so much business. I can't even. I need a calculator to figure the losses.
You just got to talk to them on the air if you want to answer the phone on the air. That's the
now
rule.
you tell me.
Okay, so you didn't take the call, so it's
Right.
all good. So go ahead. So, but fentanyl, is it as much of a
Absolutely.
problem? What side of that problem do you see as a criminal defense lawyer? In other words, I know that someone will sell fentanyl to someone else, that person will die, and now all of a sudden they'll charge the deal with
Well,
murder.
I'm glad you raised that example because way before fentanyl, if I can divert just a little bit, but on the same subject of delivery that results in death, no matter how small the substance or minor the amount, can result in a first-degree murder charge. I guess I'm going back, and this is a great segue, I'm going back like 20 years where I'm reading that they destroyed the whole idea. I used to be a Metro section of the Sun Sentinel, and the whole front page was all crimes, local crimes, and I always knew every judge, every prosecutor, half the defendants, and the officers. I just love reading that stuff, and that's the nature of my business. Anyway, I'm reading about this guy who gets arrested for delivering $5 worth of heroin to an underage girl who was alleged to have OD'd as a result. And they charged Mr. Melendez with first-degree murder. And this is in Hollywood. So I'm reading that, and I just didn't, almost putting aside the nature of the law, which I understand the idea, but first-degree murder, really? So I went to see the guy, and this is when, I guess it's the same now. I went down to the jail the next day. He was not represented, and I sat with him. I went 3 or 4 times. I said, listen, Jose Melendez, I said, if you lie to me once, I'm out, but I'm offering to represent you. I had to gain his trust just as much as he had to gain mine, I think. I wanted to make sure it was a fit because I was in for the duration. And we had a nice conversation, and he was scared to death. He was Honduran, and he was worried.
So you approached him about this?
Absolutely.
What possessed you to do that?
The nature of the article. It just hit me like there's something terribly wrong with this.
So you saw that there was a potential injustice and you wanted to fix it, so you volunteered to represent this guy?
Everything about that article just rubbed me the wrong way from a very deep instinctual level. I think I'm pretty intuitive, and that's the way it hit me. So I went down to the jail, and there's no bar issue. I'm not soliciting him because I'm offering this pro bono. I'm not looking to get paid.
So you did it for free?
Yeah, I'm offering it that. This guy didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and that wasn't even an issue. I was looking to right what I thought was a catastrophic wrong.
How'd that turn out?
I'm going to tell you. So we went in finally, the dust settled, and I represented him. It was in front of Ilona Holmes, who I loved Ilona. She's got a lot of bad rap for nothing, but she was one of my favorite judges.
I always thought she was a great lady.
Me too.
Great judge.
Yeah. Anyway, I got him out on bond, and it turns out that Sherry Maresco, who was the victim, OD'd, and the medical examiner concluded. But keep in mind, this is a Hollywood police, and they weren't exactly the superstars of the drug trafficking law enforcement branch. It was determined that she died from a combination of cocaine intoxication and respiratory failure. Respiratory failure often is a result of opiates.
Which are depressants of the central nerve.
Exactly. Worked the case up. Howard Scheinberg was the prosecutor. Worked the case up. John Kershaw, no, it wasn't him. It was a Hollywood detective. Worked it up for a couple of years, and the charges were dropped because one reason was the drugs were delivered to her girlfriend, Christina, whose last name escapes me, who then had to deliver it to the victim. Why wasn't she charged with first-degree murder or delivery? Follow?
Yeah.
There's also evidence that my guy worked in conjunction with a guy in the trailer park who was a big dealer. My guy was a nickel and dime guy, literally, and they never indicted the other guy, but they told my guy to go in and do a buy and wear a wire, which made no sense because he did the buy and he wore the wire. They never charged the guy, the distributor in the trailer park who was distributing heroin on a larger scale. I carried the case for 2 years and they ended up dismissing it. I never saw a guy leave the state so fast as Jose Melendez when that judge said, you're free to go. That I feel, and this is a message straight to the Florida bar, I feel that my CLE hours are completely fulfilled for the next 20 years.
What, just from that case?
I'm kidding, but sounds good.
Well,
no, I'm not really, but it was the right thing to do. I felt very rewarded for it. He was appreciative, and I thought it was a good demonstration of what goes wrong and why people Everybody needs representation. They were railroading this guy. It wasn't even the primary cause of her demise. As an aside note, her boyfriend, she was underage. Her boyfriend, who was 18, was feeding her cocaine on a regular basis, which was one of the causes of her death, but he never got charged. There you go. There's another example, I think, of what lies behind the surface.
So many of these criminal cases are incredible stories unto themselves. The stories that often never get told. Because what would have happened to that guy if he just got a public defender, some inexperienced kid? Do you think the result would have been any different?
I like to believe not, but that brings up another one. This is an interesting one. Guy goes in, he's wired, he's an informant for narcotics, street level. Goes in to purchase narcotics from my client. So they're monitoring it, audio, there's no video.
Right.
They monitor, he asked for, I think, 15 pills, whatever it was. You can hear him. He was briefed by the detective. Of course, they searched him, they claimed, but they probably never do, but they do. And he goes in to do the deal, and you hear the transaction as much as you can. He goes, I'm going to use the bathroom. You might have anything to drink? And he gets a drink or whatever. You hear him going to the bathroom, and he walks out, and the detective reports, he came back out with the 13 pills. I go, so I'm having a field day crossing him. I go, wait a minute. The whole sting was for you to buy 15 pills at $20 a piece. You got marked cash from the detective. You had the marked cash. You did the transaction.
Wearing the wire.
You're wearing the wire. We heard it all. But then you went to use the bathroom, right? He goes, yeah. What'd you do in the bathroom? Objection. Okay. Why'd you go to the bathroom? What do you mean? I had to use the bathroom. But what I heard, and you literally could hear this on the video, you can hear him open like a can of soda, whatever he asked for. And I said, you didn't by any chance drop 2 of those pills, those opiate pills that you were too short when you came out to the detective because they seemed to have disappeared. Were you high on 700 milligrams of oxycodone at that time? Russell, I had a field day. That's what he did. He stole 2 of the pills and ate them when he took his little break in the bathroom. And the case was over. It was over, and rightfully so, because when that came out, and my theory was developed during the course of the trial, to be honest. I don't remember exactly, but it's those kind of things that can make or break a case that may not be relevant to whether my client, but how are you going to trust this guy in any capacity? And these supervising detectives, street level guys, are supposed to be drug testing them and making sure they're not using, abusing, selling, buying, or involved in the drug trade. But 9 times out of 10, they are. And that's what really used to get me upset in those days, because anybody they wanted to target, they could take down with their best friend. They even set up a guy that was in a recovery group, which is wholly illegal and unconstitutional, my client. And it took me a year to get them to back down from something that was so outrageously unethical and immoral.
Because he was in recovery trying to get off of drugs.
And they're trying to get it right. They're playing on his weaknesses and his addiction. It's outrageous. And the fact that they even bought that case, back in those days, and maybe I am singling at John Gallagher, that's how they operated. They didn't supervise the informants. 5-time convicted felon going after my guy, a first offender, and they're looking at a 20-year reduction, or at least a waiver of the min man, meaning the informant, at my guy's expense. They're going to say anything. They're going to do anything. So this is something that not enough lawyers who do trafficking defense exploit. They're too easy to sell their guy out, to get him a reduced sentence, which sometimes is not the answer, because there shouldn't be any sentence if there's sufficient evidence of entrapment or outrageous police conduct, which is all the time.
Bruce Zimmett, who was recently on, who, like you, is a passionate and real trial lawyer, explained that a lot of criminal lawyers are guys who will meet them and plead them. That's what he says. So I guess like every other type of lawyer, there are those lawyers who are in it for the money, in it to get cases settled without getting their hands dirty, getting into it, or going to trial. Is that accurate?
Those prosecutors know, as a practitioner in PI, they know who the real heavyweights are. They know the guys who try cases. They know the guys who ain't bluffing. The insurance companies know that the trial lawyers who are going versus going to up till the eve of trial and settling, they know who we are. They know who you were, and you're going to maximize your recovery. These sellout lawyers, everybody knows how they operate. They don't represent a threat, and the state doesn't take them seriously for good reason, and they get away with murder. I was committed to standing out and having a rap that that I worked hard for and deserved, and try to serve my client to the best of my ability. And that's all we can ever wish for.
You're certainly very passionate about what you do. Just to go over to the jail and offer to represent someone for free, I'm sure lawyers were not lined up to offer this guy their services. But that's how you feel about it?
Big time.
You've been doing this a long time. Why are you here? Why are you still practicing? Why aren't you on a golf course somewhere or on a yacht?
I'm not looking to retire ever, first of all. I love what I do. I make my own hours. I pick and choose my cases. I quote higher fees now because I'd rather they walk than me get paid a lesser fee for the stress that it brings upon me. So I have no problem quoting a bigger number because I believe I'm worth it. And if they walk, then they walk. But I think it makes me more attractive, the fact that I'm ready to walk away. And I'm certainly not chasing them. And there were times back in like the old days where maybe that might have happened, but I don't do that. And that attitude has made my life a lot easier. Why would I stop? What am I going to do all day? There's so many things you can do. I'm not a huge traveler. I like to travel, but I like the gym. I like the beach. I like hanging out. I like to dine and things like that. Where am I going? So I'm not giving it up. I'm not going to be stagnant. And how many people do we know or I know that retired that are miserable? They have nothing to do all day.
Or dead.
Or on their way out.
It's not for everybody to practice law, but you seem to have the same attributes that other great lawyers who have done it for a long time. None of them have any plans on retiring. They want to keep doing it because that's what they know and that's what they love.
It's an addiction, and Fred articulated it, and he's an example of a guy who's never had that. I've known Freddie for 40 years, and he's everything that everybody says he is and more. He's just one of those guys born to do what he does and true to himself, if nothing else. He expressed it well when he talked about why ever stop? That's what keeps people going. At least for me, it's going to keep me going. It'll keep me alive with the quality of life. I have no intentions of giving it up.
So as a criminal lawyer, I know that court appearances, you actually have to go to live and your clients have to be there, often brought over from the jail. Unlike civil, where everything is on Zoom, right? In criminal court, how often are you there on a weekly basis?
Not as much as the old days, but it's much more litigious as far as in person, because I'm never, ever going to entertain the thought of trying a case over Zoom, even though during the initial pandemic days, that was courthouse, hallway talk, which I was not going to have any part of. There's no chance, no matter what the judge ordered me to do, I'm going to pick a jury over Zoom.
Right.
But there was talk of it. Or you had to be immunized, and don't get me started with that.
My point is this. You go to court, you see all these young lawyers there. First of all, does that make you appreciate how old you really are? I know. Look, you and I talked about this before we went on the air. We're both in the September of our lives, so to speak, but we both feel much younger. We look younger, and we act younger. But does that give you some perspective to go to court and see these prosecutors or these defense attorneys and the ink is still wet on their law degrees?
I'm going to tell you, I feel for these guys because they will never, ever remotely have the kind of experience and jump through the hoops that we did. We were fortunate to jump through back in the day, where, first of all, there was a vibe in the courthouse. There's absolutely no vibe. There's no commiseration of lawyers. We used to hang out in the cafeteria. Those were some of the best days. I'd go to hearings just so I could hang out before or after. There was camaraderie. There was a vibe. That was exciting. War stories all the time. It's a sign of the times. It's zero. It's a vacuum now. And that's just a sign of the social media, how people are separated, and it's no longer the same warmth and intimacy that we used to have.
Right.
And I thank God, I'd rather have had that than be a 20-year-old kid growing up now and not knowing what I missed. And there's also the element of I lived in a courtroom. I literally, back in the day, I would go from floor to courtroom. I'd have 8 hearings at 9 o'clock. Where were you? What do you mean, Judge, where was I? I had 6 hearings at 9 o'clock. And you still got the where were you? But I loved it because the days flew by and everybody was rocking and rolling. I'm talking about the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, and I was right there as well, Gary.
Yes.
And they say that great minds think alike. I, too, used to love going over to the 845 motion calendar dockets that they had in the civil cases, not because I wanted to go to hearings or put on a suit and tie, as we had to do back then, but because of all of the relationships and the connections and the BSing and the grabbing coffee and the whole vibe and stopping in to talk to the judge after the hearing. I know that all of that is basically over. Your hearing ends, you leave, and there's none of that camaraderie, right?
It's nothing like it used to be, and there's no reason for these young and upcoming lawyers to know it's any different. They're being acclimated into a system that's Zoom predominantly, and the whole thing of hanging out in the hallway, waiting for your 8:45, where you're talking to the other lawyer, you're making progress, you're negotiating, you're getting things done. That whole element's completely gone.
Do you notice that these younger lawyers are lacking or struggling when it comes to their soft skills, dealing with other people, maybe negotiating, the whole relationship thing? Has that been eroded? And I'm asking you this for a purpose because as a consultant and coach, I work with a lot of younger lawyers or older lawyers who have these younger Gen Z lawyers, if you will. So how has it affected the quality of the lawyering or the people?
I don't think they'll ever know what they're missing. I don't think they'll. How could you know what you're missing is a negative, basically? It's going to warp or slow their development and their evolution as litigators and as negotiators and just as human beings, just one-on-one. You're just missing that entire element. And the whole Zoom thing, on one level, I think is designed to remove that. It's supposed to be efficient and everything else. But
well, I know the judges like it. They can get a lot more work done.
of course they do. And a lot of lawyers like it because they ain't driving, paying for parking or fuel, driving to the courthouse and putting their jacket on and walking up. I get that. And I did that for 42 years, so I paid my dues if anybody's entitled to that. But do I still get a high from going into a courtroom and trying a case and being in the mix? I love it. That's what keeps me going. I'll never get tired of it.
So with that said, what is your advice? We have a lot of younger lawyers or newer lawyers who are listening, who will be listening to this hopefully. What is your advice to them, knowing that they're going to have a totally different experience than you had and that I had? But in order, the justice system, the wheels of justice continue to grind on, and there's going to always be prosecutors and PDs and private defense attorneys. What is your best advice to them looking forward?
I think more reasons for this specific advice is because with the advent of AI and all this revolutionized social media and everything else, the most important thing I would tell them is there ain't no shortcuts. So you can keep trying the shortcuts in the AI and cheating on the research with all the generated Google stuff or whatever these people use. There's no such thing. You're not going to make it, and you're not going to stay up whatever plateau you reach unless you do it old school, hard work, discipline, dedication. There are no other way, which reminds me of an example. I got a kid who remained unnamed who's been trying to get a job with me for a long time. And I help him out, not in a way where I'm enabling his laziness, but I try to help him out. I said, just do this or just do that. Stop relying on me, because that's how I was raised. I never relied on people. We all do as humans, but I'm a self-made guy. Let me put it to you that way. He's banging away at trying to get a job with me, and as soon as the AI stuff came out recently, I get an email from him, and I read it, and I don't know anything about AI. I read it, and the first thing that occurs to me, this son of a bitch, this is an AI-generated letter. And that is his problem. Looking for an easy way, a shortcut, is the reason I don't want him in my practice, and he's got to demonstrate that he really wants it and do whatever it takes. And that's a perfect metaphor for what I'm talking about. That's the new fad, if I will.
Calls to mind the old proverb. Hard work pays off in the future. Laziness pays off now. So is that something you notice generally with younger lawyers, that they're lazier, less detail-oriented, or attention challenged? What's your...
The whole culture in society promotes that laziness shortcut. The instant gratification with the social media, the TikTok stuff, the stuff the influencers push, by the way, who meet at the White House, by the way, and those influencers are all influenced and paid off and sponsored by the White House to push certain agendas. And you can research that. They've been invited to the White House for a reason, just like the rappers I talked about having meetings trying to create a certain culture of crime and violent conduct. So, yeah, I think that's the culture today. And I think there's very few numbers of those young lawyers that stand out and are truly hungry and ready to do what it takes. Because no matter what you build, if you don't pay your dues, it's gonna be as easily disappear. Normally wouldn't if you build on it. So there's no easy way, is what I'm saying. There's no other way around it. I'm old school. If I don't work hard towards something, I'm not going to appreciate it, and it ain't going to last anyway. So I firmly believe that, and I live by that.
Right. But your favorite part of practicing law, correct me if I'm wrong, is trying cases, being there in the courtroom in front of the jury in that great stage, that theater.
No question
right?
about it.
So in a recent episode of a podcast, I was talking about the difficulty I faced when I was thinking about how to cross-examine a German Shepherd. In the drug cases that you've tried, have you ever encountered drug-sniffing dogs that are brought into court to quote-unquote testify?
I've had a lot of canine cases involving narcotics that I've challenged one way or the other. I'm not going to tell you a dog testified or was crossed, but there's other ways to attack those canine experts.
I can't figure that out for the life of me, so briefly just tell us how you handle that. How do you cross-examine a German Shepherd?
First of all, you got to start somewhere before that, because it's a little short-sighted to just leave it at cross-examination. Because like with any other witness, you want to know who you're dealing with, what their pedigree is, no pun intended, and things like that. So over the years, and it's almost foolproof, I get a big kick out of this, I've drafted a motion for production to law enforcement agencies that utilize canines in drug cases, which are usually Belgian Malinois for drugs anyway, because there's explosive sniffing dogs, etc.
They even have cash sniffing dogs, don't they?
Of course, but the cash is tainted with cocaine. So, of course, according to them, 90%, from a defense standpoint, 90% of bills have traces of cocaine.
Don't they also have cell phone sniffing dogs I've heard about?
They probably do. They have cancer sniffing dogs, too.
Yes.
But my point is, I designed a motion, which I will sell to the highest bidder, which demands that the state or the agency produce, and I'm talking about 40 or 50 different items that I don't have off the top of my head, but the entire medical history, pedigree history
of the dog we're talking
about. Of the dog, every immunization, every training, every result of every training experience, every agency they've ever been with, every transfer, every award they've ever won.
Why? How is that relevant?
Because I've used it about 30 times, and to date, not one single agency that utilizes a canine for drugs detecting purposes has been able to respond to it in any meaningful way. In fact, if I hear one more story, the file burned up in a fire, or we destroyed it in a flood, or that filing cabinet's been stolen, or we've been burglarized, it's absolutely hilarious.
You've gotten that back from law enforcement?
Those are the answers I get. Not one law enforcement agency, barring none, has been able to comply with that. And what do you think that does to their case?
Were you able to suppress the testimony about the drug-sniffing dog?
Of course. They offer us a deal that's way below the min-man, for example, based on the disqualification of the dog, which all the things that I demand in my motion are relevant to.
So in hindsight, maybe I committed malpractice by not doing that with accelerant sniffing dog in my case, but on the other hand, I won the case. So
Listen,
I guess it doesn't matter, right?
I don't think your client cares how you won it.
It's like offsetting penalties with a football game?
Exactly. You got the result. Most clients are result-oriented. I commend you for that. I heard about that. You did a phenomenal job, and you shouldn't be looking back on that. We tend to be a lot hard on ourselves. You can compare yourself to anything 20 years later or 10 years later in retrospect. You're always going to find something. But we're in the most stressful practice, I think, in the area of human existence.
In criminal law?
Litigators. We have one of the most difficult jobs, especially when somebody's life is on the line, or their entire fortune or income or revenue or bank account is at stake. What's more stressful? Or the custody of their children. There's very few things more stressful than that, or their medical condition, or whether they're going to live or die. What's more stressful than that?
For the client.
Yeah, of course, but we're feeling that stress because they're depending on us, and often rightfully. And we bring it a lot upon us in terms of the pressure.
So, Gary, let me wrap the episode by telling you this joke. A guy is on, and by the way, I used to tell this to my clients in civil cases right before closing arguments. Probably applies to criminal cases too. A guy is on trial in a criminal case. The jury comes back and they say, we find the defendant guilty. The defendant turns to his lawyer and says, what happens now? And the lawyer says, you go to jail and I go to lunch. Have you ever lived that one?
No, but I get it.
My point in civil cases is, look, even in the worst case scenario, you're not going to jail. Obviously, you can't say that to your clients, but it points to the overall conclusion here that this is about your clients, and you have to separate your clients from you as a human being, as an advocate. doing the best that you can. They go to jail, you go to lunch.
Okay, but contrary to the logic there, I find myself too often taking it way too personal, and I get myself involved because of the sense of responsibility I like to believe I have, and it impacts me enormously. And without getting into a long, drawn-out explanation, I recently had a homicide up in Sarasota that I didn't sleep for weeks. One reason being the state revoked an offer for no reason from a murder to a manslaughter, from 25 mandatory to the plea was 15 on a manslaughter. He already had 3 in. And the state, without explanation, revoked that, which is, they can get away with that. And I had to call my client who was in custody and family and tell them, oh, that 15 years that was on the table 3 weeks ago, guess what? It's pulled off the table. It's no longer on the table. The plea offers 25. And without getting into the facts of what they had on my guy, I didn't have a whole lot of room to do anything but take the plea. So I lost sleep over that, and the deceptive way the state handled it, the manner, the unprofessional, unethical way that was handled. So that got to me big time. I really was a wreck for a couple of months.
How did that case end?
It ended where we were forced to, I'm glad you asked that, because I was embarrassed at that stage to go into that courtroom in Sarasota and plea a guy to 25 on a murder too. He was looking at life, but still, I felt, so we had a negotiated plea, right? So I go up there, and all of a sudden, the victim's family gets up there and starts elocuting that, oh, Judge, this isn't enough. We want life. That was never told to me. It was a negotiated plea. Why would they be doing that? So I turned it around. I didn't have to. It made me look like a hero because the family's seeing, wait, the state wants him to serve life. We got a plea to 25. So I was able to fix that, at least from perspective of the perception of how I operated. And it made me look as well as I could under those circumstances, which was accurate because the family wanted him to get life. 25, the kid's only 30 years old, 22 years old.
So what did he get?
He got 25. But we filed a timely motion was filed before the 60 days was up to mitigate. The family doesn't have the financial means for me to continue. In light of the victim's family screaming up and down for life and getting 25, relatively speaking, I guess you'd call that a victory. But we got jammed up is a nice term for saying the way that the prosecutor chose to handle that case from an ethical standpoint.
Wow. He went to jail, you went to lunch. And with that said...
You're going to end it on that note.
Yes, I am.
I wish I was able to adopt that. Maybe I will, but I understand the logic to it. But that was never my thinking. But I'm going to start thinking that way. Maybe I'll be able to sleep better.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for appearing on the episode. Gary Ostrow, certainly a local legend down here, but very knowledgeable, full of great stories, and you're always welcome to come back and join us.
I would love to do that, Russell.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a million. Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Take
you.
care. That wraps today's episode of the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.